Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. Tonight I'm sharing 10 disturbing hiking trail horror stories set in Washington, written in the style of first-hand survivor testimony told after the fact, when the person is technically safe but not really over what happened. These are stories about people who went looking for quiet, fresh air or a few hours alone with the trees and found something they were never meant to see. Story 1. The first time I hiked the old spur above Lena Lake, it didn't even feel like a real trail so much as a place people had stopped remembering on purpose. The main path was busy that day, kids in bright rain jackets, couples with trekking poles they probably spent too much money on, somebody eating sour gummy worms at 8 in the morning. But I'd gone up there alone because I'd been doing side work in Port Angels for 2 weeks and had one free Saturday, and I didn't want noise. I wanted damp cedar air and that washed-out gray light you get in western Washington where it never quite feels like morning or afternoon. I had gas station coffee in a metal thermos, half a turkey sandwich going soggy in my pack, a blister starting on my right heel, and a yellow poncho I'd forgotten to take out of the side pocket since April. Nothing dramatic, just normal little annoyances. The unmarked spur broke off behind a leaning signboard with half the map peeled away. I almost missed it. There was a ribbon of old orange survey tape tied around a branch, faded almost white. I remember seeing that and thinking maybe a maintenance crew had been up there recently, or maybe hunters, or maybe it had been there 10 years. Hard to tell in those woods. Everything looks half swallowed. An older woman at the parking lot had asked me where I was headed while she was trying to get a muddy Labrador into the back of her Subaru. When I pointed uphill, not even at the spur, just up, she said, "Don't stay past the quiet part." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She didn't laugh back. Looking at it now, that should have been enough for me. But people in Washington say cryptic things all the time and then wander off in REI pants like they didn't just drop a curse on your whole day. The spur climbed fast. The trail was narrow and slick with needles, and there were nurse logs on either side covered in that deep green moss that looks soft until you touch it and realize it's wet and cold like a forgotten dish sponge. I passed an old fire ring with no ash in it, just stones. I passed a tree with somebody's initials cut low into the bark and grown over so much the letters looked embarrassed. I stopped once to retie my boot and noticed how still it was. No birds, no water, no distant voices from the main trail. I told myself the silence only felt odd because I'd just left the crowded part below. Then I found the first thing that made my stomach tighten. There was sap running down the side of a cedar in thick amber beads, and pressed into that sap in a neat curved row were teeth. Not animal teeth stuck there by chance, human-looking teeth, small, flat ones, 8 of them, maybe 9, I didn't count properly. They were set into the sap like somebody had leaned their open mouth against the trunk and bitten down hard enough to leave them behind. I stood there longer than I should have. I even reached toward it and then stopped because something about the gums being absent made it worse. Just clean roots and enamel held in the sticky resin. I tried to make it make sense. Kids doing a prank, a bizarre art thing, maybe false teeth from a Halloween store. People do stupid things in the woods. That was what I kept telling myself. Then while I was still looking at the tree, I heard one slow footstep behind me, not a branch crack, not the scatter of an animal. One deliberate, full-weight step on wet ground. When I turned, there was nobody there. I actually smiled then, not because I felt okay, but because I wanted to act like I did. You know, when you're alone and you perform calmness for no one, it was like that. I said, "Hello?" in this stupid light voice, like maybe another hiker would answer, and we'd both be mildly embarrassed. Nothing. I moved on, which was probably the wrong choice, but turning around would have felt like admitting I was scared by a weird tree. And I wasn't scared yet, not fully. I was unsettled. There's a difference, or there was for about 10 more minutes. The trail leveled out near a washout where an old bridge used to be. Only the concrete footings remained, black with moss. A fallen cedar now spanned the gap, slick and broad enough to cross if you were careful. On the other side was a little shelf of ground choked with sword ferns and devil's club. That was where I smelled it, not rot exactly, not animal. It smelled like wet bark peeled too fresh, mixed with something sweet and old, the way cut pumpkins smell when they've started to collapse. I looked up because I suddenly had the strongest feeling something was above me. I only saw it clearly once. It was crouched on the broken bridge footing to my left, so still it blended with the bark and stone until its head moved. It was the size of a person, maybe a little taller, but built wrong through the shoulders, too narrow at the waist and too long in the arms. Its skin, if that was skin, looked gray-brown and stringy like cedar bark soaked and wrapped around a body. Where its eyes should have been there was only smooth, pale flesh stretched flat, no sockets at all, just that blankness. Its nose was barely there, and its mouth. The mouth was a vertical split, not wide but long, from upper lip almost to the point of the chin, opening slowly as if it had just remembered how. I didn't scream. I made this ugly, breathless grunt and slipped backward on the log. My thermos flew out of my hand and clanged into the creek bed below. The thing tipped its head, not curious exactly, more like it was aligning itself to a sound only it could hear. Then one hand came down beside it, and the fingers were so long they brushed the moss at its feet without it leaning. That was enough. Whatever part of me had been trying to explain things gave up right there. I scrambled across the log, half on my knees, half crawling, and I heard it move behind me with a dry, dragging sound, not fast, which was somehow worse. Fast would have felt animal. This felt patient. When I hit the near side, I ran downhill so hard I lost the trail twice. Branches hit my face. My bad heel went hot and then numb. Somewhere behind me I kept hearing one step, then another, spaced out, never rushing. At one point I glanced back and caught it between the trees about 30 yards uphill, weaving through trunks without ducking, head level, arms hanging almost to its knees. The iconic thing, what I still see when I wake up too quickly, is that when it opened its mouth wider, those same little teeth were set all the way down the split, not in a normal jaw, but in rows like they'd been pressed into soft wood. I don't remember every turn after that. I think I veered off onto the main trail because I started hearing human voices again far below, or maybe I heard water first. I know I burst out near the parking lot, muddy to the thighs and bleeding from one knuckle. The woman with the Labrador was gone. A teenager loading bikes into a pickup stared at me and asked if I was okay. I said I'd slipped. That was easier. My truck didn't start on the first turn, or the second. By then I was looking into the mirror so often my neck hurt. On the third try it coughed alive, and I drove downhill too fast, the whole cab smelling like coffee and dirt and that sweet peeled bark odor that had somehow come with me. I didn't notice the aftermath proof until I got home to Tacoma that night. Across the hood, above the passenger side headlight, there were 5 shallow dents in a perfect curved line, evenly spaced, as if something with long, hard fingertips had leaned there while I was trying to start the engine. I sold the truck 6 months later for reasons I pretended were financial. I still hike, but not there and not anywhere that goes suddenly quiet for no reason. People think the silence in the woods is peaceful. I know better now. Sometimes it feels more like something holding its breath. Story 2. Goat Rocks looks open from a distance, almost friendly. All those ridges and wildflower bowls and lingering snowfields that make people say things like breathtaking and untouched. But open country can make you feel trapped in its own way. There's nowhere for your eyes to rest, nowhere to hide, nowhere to tell yourself you imagined what you saw because the whole mountain is right there in front of you. Jet Harlan and I went up there in late summer, maybe August. No, it was September, because I remember being annoyed I'd packed cherries and they bruised in the cooler on the drive from Yakima. We'd been talking about doing an overnight for years, and finally did it because both of us had gotten to that age where saying someday starts sounding like a lie. Jet was the kind of person who always brought too much gear and then somehow ended up borrowing yours anyway. I brought instant noodles, a tiny stove, an extra pair of socks, lemon sunflower seeds, and a paperback I never opened. He brought a drone he wasn't supposed to fly there, a camp pillow the size of a loaf of bread, and exactly one protein bar. The weather was clear enough to make you trust it. We took an older connector trail a ranger described as passable if you don't mind a little route finding. That should have translated to don't. Instead, it translated to adventure because we were feeling young and stupid in a controlled adult way. By mid-afternoon, the path had faded into pumice and bent grass. We still had cairns now and then, and once we found a rusted signpost with no sign on it, just bolts. I remember stopping to adjust my pack and hearing what I thought was a woman calling from far down the basin. Not words at first, just a voice carried thin by the wind. Jet didn't hear it. He was busy cursing at a blister and shaking gravel out of his boot. I told myself it was another hiker. Sound travels weird in open country. Everybody knows that. A little later I heard it again, clear enough to stop me cold. It said my name in my grandmother's voice. My grandmother had been dead 3 years. I didn't tell Jet immediately, because saying something like that out loud makes it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Also because there's this embarrassing little phase where you think maybe you're just tired, dehydrated, overly suggestible. So I drank water, ate some sunflower seeds, and waited for my body to act normal again. It didn't. Near dusk, we found a flat place above a snowfield and set up camp. The wind had dropped. I could hear fabric snapping softly from someone else's tent way off, or what I assumed was someone else's tent. The noodles tasted like salt and paper. Jet kept talking about stars. I kept listening past him. Then, right as the last light was draining out of the basin, a figure came walking across the edge of the snowfield below us. It moved slowly, careful with its footing, maybe 200 yards out. Human-sized, dark jacket, no pack. I felt relieved for about half a second, because another person meant the voice had a normal explanation. Then it stopped and turned its head toward camp. Even at that distance, I could tell something was wrong with the way it stood. Its shoulders faced us, but its feet were pointed in opposite directions, one downhill, one uphill, as if the boots had been put on by someone who didn't understand legs. Jet saw it too. He said, "What is that guy doing?" The figure took 3 more steps. Each one bent strangely at the knee, too loose and backward at the same time. Then it called up to us, not in my grandmother's voice, in mine, just one word, "Jet." He looked at me so fast I actually felt insulted for a second, like he thought I'd done it somehow. Then the figure lowered itself to all fours on the snow with this awful boneless smoothness and kept moving without sinking in. That snapped whatever calm we had left. We killed the stove, shut off our lamps, and backed into the rocks above camp instead of staying in the tents. I don't know why that seemed smarter. Maybe because tents feel like confessions. Thin fabric always makes me feel more visible, not less. We huddled between 2 boulders with our packs pulled in tight and listened. The voice kept circling below. Sometimes it was me. Once it was Jet calling my name exactly the way he did when he was annoyed. Once it was a child. Once, and this made my teeth hurt, it was my grandmother humming a hymn she used to hum while washing dishes, half a note flat every time. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. Echoes, multiple hikers. Some animal call my brain was twisting into language, but every rational thought felt thin and fake compared to the cold certainty gathering in my chest. Hours passed, or maybe 1 hour passed and it felt longer. Hard to know. The moon came up enough to silver the snowfield, and that was when I saw it closest. It had come to the edge of our camp and was standing beside Jet's tent, head lowered toward the fabric like it was listening for movement inside. Its back was toward us. The jacket I'd thought I saw wasn't a jacket at all. It looked like wet hide stretched over narrow shoulder blades. The neck was too long. The hair hung in sparse dark strings. And when it turned slightly, I saw that its mouth was open not to breathe, but because it had someone else's smile pulled over its face, loose and wrong, as if expressions were something it wore. The iconic detail, the one that still gets under my skin, was its boots. They were hiking boots, ordinary brown ones, but the laces had been threaded through the flesh above the ankles, disappearing under skin that puckered around them. Jet made the tiniest sound, barely air. The thing's head snapped toward us. We didn't run downhill, too exposed. We climbed. That was Jet's idea, and for once his ideas were good. We moved up through rock and scrub with no lights, hands freezing, knees banging stone until we found a narrow break between boulders and wedged ourselves into it. Below us, the voice kept trying different people. My voice, his voice, some woman neither of us knew. Around dawn it went quiet all at once, like a radio cut off mid-song. We stayed there until full light, cramped and shaking and stupid with fatigue. When we finally went down, both tents were untouched except for Jet's. There was one bootprint dead center on the rainfly, just one, no tracks leading to it, none leading away. Clean tread, wet and dark, pressed into fabric that should never have held a print. We packed in under 10 minutes and got off that mountain without speaking much. Jet never used the drone footage from that trip. He said it corrupted. Maybe it did. The piece of proof I kept was accidental. 3 days later, I was cleaning out my phone and found an audio memo I hadn't meant to record. It was 26 seconds of wind and zipper noise. At second 19, very close to the microphone, something whispered my name in my own voice, then said, "Not this way." I deleted it. Then I checked the trash folder and deleted it again. I still miss the mountains sometimes. Not the way I used to, though. Open country feels different after you've heard your dead spoken back to you from snow. Story 3. The Hoh River Trail gets talked about like it's some kind of cathedral, and I get why. Even now I get why. Everything is green in about 100 different ways, and the light comes down weak and filtered and almost underwater. I went there by myself because I'd just come off a breakup that had turned me into one of those people who suddenly think sleeping alone in the woods will be clarifying. It was November, drizzle all day. The kind that isn't dramatic enough to complain about, but soaks every cuff and zipper without asking permission. I had a camera bag heavier than it needed to be, peanut butter crackers, a blue beanie I hated but kept wearing, a notebook with exactly 3 lines written in it, and a tiny bottle of ibuprofen rattling around loose in my hip belt. I'd heard there was an abandoned maintenance shelter on an old side path a few miles in. Not on the official route anymore, but there if you knew where to look. I like ruins more than I like summits. That's probably relevant. The turnoff was barely visible. Alder branches grown across it, mud instead of tread. The shelter itself was half swallowed by moss and sword ferns, just a low timber structure with a rusted stovepipe and a crawl space underneath where the ground dropped away. One wall had caved inward. It smelled like wet wood, mouse droppings, and old soot. I told myself it was perfect, private, photogenic, harmless. I spent an hour taking pictures of mushrooms and water beading on rotten shingles. I heated soup on my stove and burned the first batch because I was messing with camera settings. I hung my damp socks near the stove even though the stove didn't work. I remember stupid details like that because those were the last normal decisions I made. The first off thing was sound. I dropped the spoon I was using, and instead of clattering once and settling, it sounded like it bounced much farther than it should have, like the floor beneath me was hollow in a way the shelter floor definitely was. I crouched and knocked on the boards, solid. Rats, I said out loud, because giving something a name makes it manageable. Big ones. Then I heard knocking back. 3 taps, not random movement. Answering taps. I froze with one hand still on the floorboard, waited, tapped once with my knuckle. 1 tap came back directly under my hand. That should have sent me packing immediately. Instead, I did what people do when they're desperate not to feel stupid. I made explanations. Loose timber. Echo from the stove pipe. Some animal under there reacting to vibration. I even laughed once weakly to prove to myself I wasn't rattled. The daylight went early under the trees. By 5, or maybe not even 5, it gets hard to tell in that forest. The whole place had that dim green-black look like evening underwater. I set up my tent inside the shelter because I didn't like the open wall. That should tell you where my head was at. I preferred 1 layer of rotten timber and 1 layer of nylon between me and whatever might be outside. Rain ticked on the roof. Drips fell through in slow, cold hits. I lay there listening to the river somewhere beyond the trees and telling myself the tapping had stopped. Then the tent zipper started to open from the bottom, not fast, 1 tooth at a time. At first I thought I'd left it half closed and gravity was doing something weird. Then I saw the metal pull tab rise, pause, rise again. A fingertip came through the gap. Then another. They were human-shaped fingers, but far too thin, caked with black dirt under nails that looked soft and peeled. They weren't tugging at the flap. They were separating the zipper teeth with gentle pressure, as if testing how little effort it would take to come inside. I kicked hard and screamed. The whole side of the tent collapsed inward as whatever was there dropped away. I scrambled out through the top opening with my headlamp tangled around my throat, slammed into the stove, and went down on 1 knee. From under the broken section of floor near the back wall, something breathed. That's the only word for it. Wet, patient breathing from the crawl space. My headlamp beam shook over the gap just as a face rose into it, only partway. Enough. Forehead first, pale beneath streaked mud, then 1 eye, then the mouth opening the wrong way, splitting upward through the center of the upper lip toward the nose so the teeth showed in 2 uneven vertical rows. It didn't lunge. It just kept rising slowly, like something being lifted from beneath. The iconic image for me is those zipper teeth still trembling while that face was coming up behind them. I can still see the little silver tabs shaking. I ran without my boots fully tied, left the camera bag, left half my food. I had 1 flashlight and the river noise to orient by, and I crashed downhill through brush until I found the old side path, then the main trail. Twice I was sure I heard movement pacing me just off to the right, never closing in, just staying level through the ferns. Once I heard a soft tapping on wood again and realized, with a horrible jolt, that it was coming from tree trunks as I passed them. By the time I hit the trailhead, my jeans were soaked to the knees and 1 sock had bunched under my heel. I slept in my car with the doors locked and every light on until dawn. Didn't go back for the camera bag until 2 days later, and only because a ranger offered to walk in with me part of the way. I lied and said I'd had a panic attack and left gear behind. The shelter was empty. My camera bag sat where I dropped it, dry inside despite the broken wall. My tent was shredded, but not clawed the way an animal would claw. The zipper had been separated neatly all the way around, every tooth pulled apart without the fabric tearing. Inside the pot I'd left near the stove was a coil of wet black hair, not a lot, just enough to fill the bottom. I took the bag and left the rest. I still have the camera, and one of the photos from earlier that afternoon shows the shelter's dark crawl space under the rear beam. At first glance, there's nothing there. Then you zoom in and find 1 pale, eye-reflecting light from too far back in the dirt to belong to any animal I know. I never did get whatever clarity I'd gone looking for. All I learned was that some places are already occupied, and they don't always mind you being there right away. Story 4. Monte Cristo has that washed-out ghost town feeling even in daylight, like the place already knows it's being remembered as ruins and has settled into the role. I went there with Corbin Vale because he was writing some overly ambitious essay about abandoned mining towns and wanted photographs that looked unmanaged. That was his word. He said it like decay was a style choice. I went because I was between graduate seminars, needed to clear my head, and frankly didn't trust him not to step through a rotten board while monologuing about history. We drove up from Seattle before dawn, split a stale blueberry muffin at a gas station, argued about whether to bring microspikes, and listened to the same 2 songs on repeat because Corbin's phone had stopped connecting to my car. He carried a red field notebook, cheap binoculars, and a jacket that made noise every time he moved. I had a first aid kit, trail mix with too many raisins, and a pencil tucked behind one ear the whole hike without noticing. The weather was clear but cold enough that the air coming off the river bit at the back of my throat. We took a lesser-used spur above the old structures because Corbin wanted shots with no people in them. The trail climbed through alder and rockfall and then cut across a slope littered with tailings. There were bits of old cable in the dirt, rusted metal loops, half-buried timbers. The whole place felt picked over. The first strange thing wasn't big, it was a voice. Corbin had gone maybe 30 yards ahead around a bend when I heard him from behind me say, "Neha, hold up." I turned, nobody. Then I heard him ahead of me call, "You coming?" I told myself sound bounced weird off the slope. Which it does. Mountains do that. Mines do that. I caught up and told him not to mess around. He looked genuinely confused and said he hadn't said anything the first time. That should have been a warning. Instead, it became a conversation we laughed off because once you start admitting the woods are acting wrong, it's hard to stop. We reached an old collapsed outbuilding near a cut bank where the trail split. Corbin wanted to poke around. I wanted lunch. We compromised by doing both badly. I sat on a beam eating an apple with a brown spot I had to pick around while he wandered off taking photos. I could hear his boots on broken boards, the flutter click of his camera, his jacket hissing. Then all of that stopped. I called his name. No answer. When I went looking, I found fresh prints in the dust behind the structure. 2 sets, same tread, same size, both Corbin-S. One set led around the back corner. The other stopped in the middle of the clearing, as if the person wearing them had gone straight upward. I stared at those prints long enough that the cold went through my gloves. I tried to explain them. Overlapping tracks from earlier in the day, an optical weirdness in the dust, Corbin doubling back, but I knew his tread pattern because I'd watched those stupid square lug soles all morning. "Very funny," I said, and even to me my voice sounded thin. Then Corbin stepped out from behind the outbuilding. He smiled. "You lose me." I started to answer, and the real Corbin yelled my name from below the slope. The one in front of me didn't vanish or blur or do anything theatrical. It just kept smiling a little too long. Up close, the details were wrong in ways that took a second to sort. His hair was wet, although the day was dry. His red notebook strap crossed his chest, but instead of lying over his jacket, it disappeared into the fabric near the ribs, as if stitched through skin. And his teeth, this is what finally broke me, were too numerous, small and glossy, packed tight all the way back when he smiled. I dropped the apple. The thing wearing Corbin's face tilted its head and said, in Corbin's exact voice, "There you are." Then from below, again, the real Corbin shouted, "Neha, don't move." I moved immediately. Sideways, not down, I don't know why. Instinct. I skidded on loose gravel and slammed into the tailing slope while the false one took one step toward me with its knees bending a little inward, like it was learning the joints as it used them. I got a full second look and wish I hadn't. Under the jawline, where shadow should have been, there was another partial mouth pressing outward beneath the skin as if trying to take its turn. That's the image that stayed. Corbin's familiar face smiling while another mouth shifted underneath it. I slid half-ran down the scree toward the real Corbin, who grabbed my arm so hard I bruised. We didn't discuss. We just went downhill, fast and ugly, using hands when we needed to. Behind us, we kept hearing someone following at our pace, never closer than a bend, always just one turn back. Once Corbin glanced over his shoulder and went pale in a way I had never seen on him before. Later, he told me he saw two of me up there for half a second. We hit the main trail and forced ourselves not to sprint because there were finally other hikers around, and I think both of us believed acting normal might matter. At the trailhead, Corbin threw up behind a picnic table. I stood there with my hands numb around my water bottle and watched families unload coolers like the world still made basic sense. We didn't talk for almost a week. Then he texted me one photo. He had taken it just before I found the double prints. In the frame, I'm sitting on the beam with the bruised apple in my hand, looking off toward the building. Corbin is visible in the lower left, reflected in a broken window. And behind me, standing where the wall should block anything, is Corbin again, smiling. I stopped going to abandoned places after that, at least casually. Ruins used to feel empty to me. Now I think empty is just a word people use when they don't want to ask who got there first. Story 5. The Iron Goat Trail has this way of mixing beauty with old damage. You walk through wildflowers and fur, and then suddenly you're beside shattered concrete and broken tunnel mouths, reminders that people forced a railroad through there and the mountain answered back. I went in October with two friends from Bellingham, Priya Denholm and Lucas Serrat, because Priya had some romantic idea about fog and old snowsheds and Pacific Northwest melancholy, which is the sort of phrase she could say without sounding ridiculous. Luca came for photos. I came because I had just finished a brutal parent-teacher conference week and wanted a day where no one asked me for anything. I packed too much food as usual. Cheese crackers, dried mango, instant coffee packets, one pair that bruised in the car. Luca brought a film camera and 3 rolls of film like it was 1997. Priya had a wool scarf she kept insisting wasn't itchy even while scratching her neck every 5 minutes. The trail started normal. Damp railside smell, wet leaves, the low shush of highway noise fading as we moved farther in. We joked about ghost trains because that's what people do in old rail places. At one point, Luca found an old bolt the size of his thumb and pocketed it like a crow. The weather kept shifting. Fog in, fog out, bright patch, gray patch. By the time we reached one of the abandoned snow sheds, visibility had shrunk so the far end looked chewed away. The first thing I didn't like was the tapping, not random drips or branches, patterned taps moving through the shed ahead of us. Left side, then right side, then above, as if someone was knocking their way along the beams. Luca said it was water. Priya said maybe birds. I nodded because both explanations were possible and I wanted them to stay possible. Inside, the air smelled mineral and cold. Concrete walls sweating, moss in the cracks. We'd only gone 20 or 30 feet when Lucas stopped and lifted a hand. Along the right wall, just at shoulder height, was a row of dark, wet marks. At first I thought handprints. They weren't. They were forehead prints. Oval smears with a faint center line, each one pressed against the concrete as if someone had stood facing the wall and leaned forward until skin met stone. There were 7 of them in a row. That was the first time all 3 of us went quiet together. I tried to joke that maybe some art students had gotten weird up here, but the words died fast. The prints were too fresh. Water still trickled from them. We kept moving, because turning around inside that narrow, echoing place somehow felt worse than continuing. Then the tapping started again, farther ahead this time. Fast. Passing beam to beam in sequence. When we came out the far side, the fog had thickened enough to flatten everything. trees, slope, broken walls, just shapes, and between those shapes I began to catch movement. Small, quick, pale in the gray, not one thing, several. They never crossed open ground. They went from stump to concrete block to tree, low and coordinated, staying exactly at the edge of sight. I counted 3, then 5, then lost count. Priya whispered, "Kids," which made no sense and still managed to be the worst suggestion possible. Luca raised his camera. A stone hit the path beside him, not thrown hard, dropped almost politely. Then another struck the concrete behind us. I looked up and saw one of them fully for a second, perched on a fallen beam above the shed entrance. It was the size of a small adult, but crouched in a way that made the limbs look folded twice. Its skin wasn't pale so much as colorless, like fungus grown into a body shape. The face had no nose that I could see, only 2 slits and a mouth pressed flat and damp. What made me stop breathing was the way its head touched the beam, not the top of the head, the forehead, as if that was how it sensed the world. The iconic moment came a second later. More of them emerged along the exterior wall, and one by one they leaned forward until their foreheads touched the concrete in the exact same line as the wet prints inside. We ran, not gracefully. Luca nearly lost the film camera. Priya snagged her scarf on brush and left it. I remember the sound behind us more than anything, those taps racing through the structures parallel to our path as the things kept pace without coming fully into view. When we hit a washout, Luca shouted that we should cut down toward the maintenance road instead of following the trail. I argued for maybe half a second, then a rock clacked off a tree inches from my head and the argument ended. We scrambled down through slick brush on our backsides, grabbing roots and devil's club like idiots. Somewhere above, the tapping stopped all at once. That silence lasted maybe 2 seconds before something heavier dropped onto the slope behind us and started following. The road was closer than it should have been, or maybe we were just moving blind. A state truck happened to come around the bend not long after, and the driver gave us the kind of look reserved for people who are muddy, bloodied, and trying too hard to act normal. He offered us a ride back to the lot. We took it. None of us mentioned the thing on the slope. We talked about slipping and getting turned around. Adults love a plausible lie. Back at home, Luca developed the film. Most of it came out fogged and scratched. In one frame of the snowshed wall, though, you can see Priya looking left, me tightening my jacket, and Luca's own shadow stretched across the ground. Inside both front pockets of his jacket are round, dark stains that weren't there that day. He checked the pockets and found them full of rust flakes pressed into little damp circles, each about the size of a forehead. I haven't gone back. Priya says she'd rather forget it. Luca keeps the photo in a drawer but won't scan it. I teach 4th grade, and every year some kid asks why old tunnels are scary. I tell them it's because they're dark. That's not the real answer. The real answer is that some places remember pressure, and some things still come back to add their mark. Story 6. When my aunt died, I inherited a little cabin near the edge of Gifford-Pinchot National Forest that I had only been to twice as a kid. Calling it a cabin is generous. It was 1 room, a loft that made your calves ache to climb, a propane stove that hated me, and a porch that leaned enough to make coffee slide in its mug if you put it down carelessly. I drove out there in early spring to decide whether to sell it. I brought cleaning supplies, 2 grocery bags, a box of old family papers, canned chili, a flashlight with weak batteries, and a quilt my aunt had made that smelled faintly of cedar and attic dust. The property backed up to a trail nobody maintained anymore. My aunt used to call it the meadow path, though in my memory the meadow was just a flat place where grass grew oddly high and nothing taller seemed to survive. As a kid, I found that disappointing. As an adult, I found it convenient because I could walk off stress in a place nobody else was using. The first day I swept dead flies from the window tracks, found a spoon behind the stove, and discovered that one of the kitchen chairs had a leg shorter than the others. Useless details, but that's what I remember because they came before the wrongness. The chili tasted metallic. My phone got one bar near the porch and none inside. I changed the sheets in the loft just to keep from thinking about probate paperwork. Near dusk, I took the meadow path. The woods were damp and close and smelled of soil waking up. I passed old fence posts almost swallowed by salal and one section of wire half buried in moss. About 10 minutes in, I noticed strips of yellow cloth tied to branches, not bright recent survey tape. Faded cotton fraying at the ends, each strip knotted twice. I told myself my aunt had done it years ago to mark the way back. Then I reached the meadow and saw the cloth tied all around it at waist height, post to post, tree to tree, making a rough boundary. That unsettled me more than the meadow itself. The grass in the center was short, almost shaved, and there were no flowers anywhere despite the season. Wind moved in the trees behind me, but not in the grass. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, thinking about property lines and old animal pens and childhood memory distortion, trying to file the scene into something harmless. Then something moved under the ground. At first it looked like a mole tunnel, just a lifting in the grass. But it was too wide and there were several of them, long bulges traveling slowly beneath the surface from one side of the meadow to the other. Not random paths. Purposeful, curving around each other. I stepped back immediately, then hated myself for it and stepped forward again because I needed a better look. That was when the grass dipped inward at the center and a patch of bare earth opened like a mouth exhaling cold air. I wish I could say I saw a whole figure and know exactly what it was. I didn't. I saw enough. Something pale and human-backed rose just beneath the surface of the sod, not above it, but inside it, as if bodies were moving under a skin of roots and dirt. One shoulder pressed up, then the shape of a spine, then what looked unmistakably like the back of a head turning beneath an inch of soil without breaking through. The iconic image, the thing that has never left me, is a human handprint forming from underneath the grass, fingers spreading up through green blades without tearing them. I stumbled backward into the boundary cloth and felt it pull tight across my waist. The movement under the meadow stopped at once. For a second everything was still enough that I thought maybe I'd missing it. Like playing tricks, ground settling, stress, grief. I started building explanations because that was all I had. Then a voice came from the cabin direction, not a mimic of anyone I knew, just my name, once soft and near. There should have been nobody out there. I ran back so hard I hit the porch steps and nearly knocked myself flat. Inside, I locked the door even though the latch was laughable, then pushed the kitchen table against it like that would matter. Dusk deepened fast. Every few minutes I heard a faint brushing sound circling the cabin, not footsteps exactly, more like wet grass dragged along the walls. At one point the porch boards creaked under a careful weight. The brushing stopped at the threshold. That detail mattered. I didn't understand it, and I still don't, but whatever had come with me up from the meadow did not cross inside. It moved from window to window instead, darkening the lower glass for a second at a time. I kept low, flashlight off, heart slamming so hard my hearing came and went in waves. Once I saw the outline of fingers press against the screen on the kitchen window from the outside. Too many joints, too deliberate. I stayed awake until a colorless dawn worked through the curtains. Then I packed the truck in about 8 minutes, leaving half the cleaning supplies and all the papers. When I carried the last box out, I found the porch threshold packed with objects that had not been there the night before. A neat line of yellowish stones shaped like teeth, 40 or 50 of them, each wet with dark soil. I didn't touch them. I drove. That was 3 years ago. The cabin still belongs to me on paper, but I haven't gone back and probably never will. Every now and then I think about selling it, and every time I start the paperwork I remember that handprint rising under living grass and lose the appetite for ownership. Some places do not want heirs, some places only want witnesses. Story 7. The Ozette Triangle on the coast is one of those hikes people describe like a reward. Boardwalk through cedar swamp, then beach, then sea stacks and wind and tide pools. I'd done it once before with a girlfriend and remembered it as peaceful, so naturally I went back alone right after she moved out, which says something about my decision-making around that time. I drove out from Tacoma with a bag of barbecue chips, one sneaker that always rubbed my little toe, a cheap poncho from Fred Meyer, and a cooler with a sandwich I forgot to eat. The radio cut in and out most of the way there. By the time I hit the trailhead, the sky was a flat sheet of gray, and the ocean air had that cold iron smell it gets before rain. The boardwalk section was familiar enough to relax me. Mud below, cedar trunks, little frogs flicking out of the way. I remember stopping to fix the strap on my watch and noticing someone had left a red child's shovel beside the planks. That sort of thing bugs me in the woods, trash with a story attached. I almost carried it out but didn't want to juggle it. At the beach the wind picked up, not storm hard but steady. I started north along the tide line, boots sinking where the sand got dark. There were gulls, driftwood, the usual, nobody close. Far downshore I could see what looked like another hiker near a sea stack, standing still with a hood up. I waved, no response. Fine, some people don't wave. About half an hour later I realized I'd seen that same figure 3 times at 3 different distances and never once watched it move between them. That was enough to put a tight little knot under my ribs, not full fear. Yet, I told myself there were multiple people in similar rain jackets. That's believable on a Washington beach. Everybody owns the same 3 colors. I cut inland briefly on a side path to get around a pinch point where the tide was chewing at the base of a bluff. The trail there passed through stunted spruce and salal with the beach noise muffled just enough that every snapped twig felt personal. That was where I heard someone retching, deep, wet gagging just ahead and off trail. I called out, thinking somebody might need help. No answer. I pushed through the brush maybe 10 feet and found a hollow in the ferns where the ground dropped toward a little freshwater seep. Something crouched there with its back to me, human-shaped, bare shoulders, wet black hair hanging in ropes. It seemed to be vomiting seawater into the ferns in slow, heavy pours. I honestly thought it was an injured person for one full terrible second. I said, "Hey, are you okay?" It turned, water and sand spilled from its mouth, not with force, just a steady draining. Its skin was the pale gray of a belly fish. The eyes were there but filmed over, and along the throat I could see pebbles shifting under the skin each time it swallowed. One hand braced on the mud had fingers webbed halfway to the tips. The iconic detail was the sound, not a roar, not a hiss, just wet pebbles clicking together inside its open mouth when it looked at me. I backed away so fast, I tripped over my own heel and went down hard on my wrist. By the time I got up, it was coming after me on all fours, but not fast through the brush, more like it knew the beach would do the work for it. I ran back to the shore and started south instead of north because I'd lost track of distance and just wanted open ground. Behind me, every time I glanced over, I saw it appear at the edge of the water, then vanish behind drift logs, then reappear closer without any obvious running. Once it stood knee-deep in the surf and lifted its head, and a stream of black seaweed hung from its mouth like hair. I kept trying to reason it out as I ran, starved bear with mange, person in some kind of hypothermic state, a trick of distance and rain. Every explanation collapsed as soon as I looked back. The tide had come in farther than I realized. At one narrow point, the water was already slapping a bluff face. I had to either cut inland through nasty brush or scramble over a giant jam of driftwood. I chose the wood and nearly broke my ankle doing it. Halfway up, I looked down and saw the thing below me at the base of the logs, one hand resting flat against the pale trunk, head tilted up. Its mouth opened. Sand poured out in a thick stream, and beneath the sand were human teeth. I don't know if they were its teeth. I don't know if that matters. I made it over, tore my palm open on barnacled wood, and found the trail inland again by sheer luck. The boardwalk back felt endless. Twice I heard splashing under the planks where there shouldn't have been enough water for anything larger than a frog. Once I heard footsteps matching mine from below and a voice, no mimic this time, just a bubbling little laugh. At the parking lot, my truck was alone except for a ranger vehicle 2 spaces over. I almost went and said something, then looked at myself. Wet, wild-eyed, bleeding, covered in sand, and knew how it would sound. I got in, locked the doors, and sat shaking until I had the hands to drive. On the way home, about 20 miles inland, I noticed a dried salt handprint on the inside of the passenger window. Inside, I cleaned it off at a gas station with paper towels that smelled like bleach. For a week afterward, I kept finding grit on my floor mats no matter how many times I vacuumed. I still hike the mountains. I don't do lonely beaches anymore. The ocean is too good at hiding things until they're already looking back. Story 8. I was on a survey crew outside Cle Alum when this happened, working an old service road that cut along a ridge above thick timber and scattered rock. The official job was boring, flagging line-of-sight points for utility maintenance, checking erosion, the kind of thing that gives you sunburn on cloudy days. There were 3 of us that week, me, Hanna Petrovic, a crew lead named Bellamy Rhodes who chewed cinnamon gum like it was a personal challenge, and a seasonal hire, Jonah Pike, who wore brand new boots and kept asking if bears ever target people. It was early October, dry on the east side, dust on the road, cold shadow in the trees. We parked the truck at a washout and hiked in with tripods, bright tape, a laser rangefinder, and way too much water. Bellamy had a thermos that smelled like burnt coffee. Jonah brought jerky so peppery it made the whole truck sneeze. I had a notebook already missing 2 pages, chapstick in my pocket, and a pebble in my left boot I was too stubborn to stop and remove for the first mile. The road itself felt wrong in a quiet, practical way from the start. No fresh tire tracks, no bird calls. Even the dust looked undisturbed except for our own prints. Bellamy commented on it once, said maybe the area had been closed longer than the map showed. That made sense, most odd things do at first. Around midday we spread out a little to mark sight lines around a bend. I was ahead, Jonah behind me, Bellamy farther back near the truck spur. I heard Jonah call, "Hanna, wait up," from maybe 20 yards ahead. I stopped. Jonah was behind me. He looked up at the same time, and I could tell from his face he'd heard it too. Bellamy came up irritated, asked what the holdup was. We told him. He rolled his eyes and said the ridge was echoing. Then, very calmly, from farther up the road, Bellamy's voice said, "You two can come on." The real Bellamy went pale under his beard. You can guess what we should have done. Turn around, pack it in, tell somebody the line wasn't accessible. Instead, we kept moving, because people at work will tolerate fear before they'll tolerate sounding foolish in a report. The road climbed to a switchback where the timber opened on one side and dropped steep into a ravine. Dust was thick there. That's where we found a new set of prints. Mine, same boot tread, same worn outer heel, same shallow drag on the left where my gait turns in when I'm tired. Only these prints were ahead of us, leading around the bend. I laughed once, short and ugly, because my brain needed to shed pressure somehow. Bellamy swore. Jonah said maybe I'd been up there another day and forgotten, which was such a stupid explanation I almost loved him for trying. We rounded the bend together. Someone was standing in the road maybe 60 yards ahead wearing my orange safety vest. My first thought wasn't supernatural, it was theft. Some asshole from another crew, some prank, but the body shape was wrong. too tall by a few inches, arms hanging a little long, and the posture. It was standing with its back to us, but its head was turned all the way around, looking at us over its shoulder with my face. Not a distorted version. Mine. Same nose, same scar at the eyebrow from childhood, same dark braid over one shoulder. The expression was blank, not hostile, just attentive. That image still gets me because the body never turned, only the head. Jonah made a choking sound. Bellamy said nope, like that was going to fix things, and grabbed my sleeve. The thing up the road lifted one hand and waved with my exact little half-bent wrist flick I do when I'm carrying equipment. Then in my voice it called back, "You left the marker." I had. A pink survey flag was missing from my side pocket. I don't remember deciding to retreat. We were already moving when the thing took its first step toward us. Its boot struck the dust in my rhythm, heel out, toe in, a perfect imitation. Bellamy ordered us downslope into the timber instead of back down the road, maybe to break line of sight. We crashed through brush and loose rock, sliding toward the ravine while branches whipped our faces. Behind us, I could hear someone descending more carefully, not crashing, just choosing the correct footholds every time. At the bottom was a dry creek bed clogged with deadfall. Bellamy shoved Jonah across first, then me. Halfway over I looked up and saw it on the opposite bank, framed between pines, still wearing my face and vest, but now with Bellamy's cinnamon gum bulge working slowly in one cheek. That was the second and last good look I got. We spent maybe an hour doubling back through the draw to reach a wider maintenance corridor where the power lines cut the trees open. None of us talked above a whisper, though I don't know why volume felt dangerous. Once we heard Bellamy calling from uphill while Bellamy was right beside us. Once Jonah stopped dead because he could hear himself crying from somewhere ahead, even though he was. We reached the truck near sunset. The cab had been untouched, but on the hood, laid out in neat order, were 3 pink survey flags. One for each of us. We had only lost one. The afterproof was worse in a quieter way. The GPS unit Bellamy carried logs our track automatically. When he downloaded it for the report, our route showed a straight side spur out into the ravine for half a mile at exactly 1:17 p.m., then returning to merge with the road. We were on a slope so steep a person couldn't have walked it in a straight line if they'd wanted to, and we were all together on the road at 1:17 because that was when we found the first print. I transferred out of field work the next season. Sometimes I think I overreacted. Then I catch my own reflection unexpectedly in a dark window, and for one horrible instant, I expect the head to still be facing forward while the eyes are already on me. Story 9. The enchantments are beautiful in a way that almost feels aggressive. Too much granite, too much sky, too much cold, clear water that looks harmless right up until it reminds you how fast your body stops mattering in alpine country. I went in alone because everyone I knew who wanted permits was either more fit than me or less patient than me, and I didn't feel like pretending to enjoy company at altitude. I packed carefully. That's what annoys me now. I was careful. Oatmeal packets, stove fuel, blister tape, extra battery, dried apricots, one little bottle of bourbon I told myself was for celebration, and a paperback mystery I read exactly 6 pages of before giving up. The climb up to Kolchak was normal suffering. Switchbacks, sweat cooling too fast when the wind hit, people coming down cheerful and infuriating. By evening I had a small sight near the lake and legs that felt hollow. The water looked metallic under the fading light. There was still shelf ice tucked along one shaded edge even though the trail below had felt like summer. I noticed first that the lake surface wasn't matching the wind. The pines moved. My tent flap moved. Ripples crossed most of the water. But one narrow band near shore stayed glass still. I told myself it was sheltered by submerged rock. I made dinner badly, dropped my spoon, found it under the stove, cursed at a zipper, all the ordinary camp stuff. A pair of hikers passed farther off and waved. Their voices faded, dusk thickened. The band of still water remained. Maybe an hour later, I'm fuzzy on timing up there, I walked down with my headlamp off to rinse my mug. The moon was bright enough that I didn't need much light. When I stepped onto the flat rock at the shore, the stone under my boot made a hollow cracking sound. Ice. Thin, clear, right at the edge. I shone my light down. A face was under it, not frozen in the ice exactly. Pressed against the underside from below, lips parted, eyes open. My first stupid thought was a drowned climber, someone trapped. I dropped to one knee before my brain caught up and realized the water beneath that ice shelf was too shallow for a body positioned upright. The face was mine. Not similar. Mine. It smiled first. Then I heard the faintest fogging sound and watched a white bloom spread across the ice directly beneath my boots from the underside, as if something there had exhaled. That was the iconic moment, not the face, the breath. I staggered backward so hard I sat down in the scree. When I looked up again, the face was gone, but a shape moved farther out under the clear black water, pale and elongated, turning without disturbing the surface. I started telling myself all kinds of garbage: reflected headlamp, altitude exhaustion, shadow plus fear equals nonsense. I almost believed it until the lake gave a little knock from beneath the ice shelf. 1, 2. I went back to the tent and zipped myself in, which felt absurd the second I did it. I kept the headlamp on. The bourbon stayed unopened because my hands were shaking too hard to trust them. Sometime deep in the night, I heard my own voice outside the tent say, very calmly, "You're on my side." I didn't answer. Every hair on my arms lifted at once. The voice moved around to the back of the tent and repeated it softer. Then something cold pressed flat against the rainfly. Not a hand, more like a whole face, nose and brow and cheekbones making a wet imprint through the nylon from the outside. I could see the shape in silhouette, and I could see that the head was angled too high off the ground for anyone kneeling there normally. I waited until dawn without sleeping. When light finally thinned the fabric, I unzipped the tent a few inches and looked out. Nothing, just granite, frost, and the lake bright as clean steel. I packed faster than I'd ever packed in my life. One of my guy lines had been pulled taut and retied overnight in a knot I don't know how to make. On the lake shore, right where I'd seen the face, there were wet marks leading up onto the rock, not footprints. They looked like the edge pattern left by crampons, except each mark was curved, like something rigid and toothed had been set down in pairs along the stone. I took a different route down than I'd planned because I wanted people around me as soon as possible. Coming off the pass, I kept checking every tarn and snow patch and polished granite reflection, because once you've seen your own face in the wrong place, mirrors stop feeling passive. At home, when I unpacked, I found one more thing. The inside of my titanium mug had gone reflective in a way it never had before, polished bright like chrome. I could see my face in it clearly enough to shave by, and at the very bottom were 3 scratches in the metal, fine and parallel, curved like someone had dragged the same narrow teeth across it. I still own the mug. I keep meaning to throw it away. Instead, it sits at the back of a cabinet where I don't have to see myself in it unless I lean too far in. That feels about right. Some memories don't stay in your head. They wait in objects until you look at them wrong. Story 10. People act like Tiger Mountain is too close to Seattle for anything really bad to happen. Too many trail runners, too many parking lots, too much cell service. I used to think that too, which is why I picked it for a solo evening hike the week I moved out of my apartment in Issaquah. I needed cheap therapy and had already exhausted takeout and bad decisions. So I drove up after work with a hoodie, a flashlight, half a bag of almonds, a phone battery at 43%, and the cardboard smell of moving boxes still on my hands. I'd done the main trails plenty of times. This time I took a lesser side path I remembered leading past an old shelter foundation or maybe a closed maintenance building. Honestly, the memory was vague. I just wanted somewhere less crowded, where I could sit for 10 minutes without hearing podcasts leak from strangers' speakers. It was late enough that the parking lot was thinning. Damp air, low clouds that after rain smell the foothills get where everything seems newly unwrapped. I passed a guy lacing up trail shoes, a woman walking two huskies, and a teenager eating chips with the car door open. Ordinary, comforting even. The side path narrowed quickly. Ferns brushed both knees. I found the old structure after maybe 20 minutes. A squat, roofed shelter with one wall missing and picnic tables inside gone silver with age. Someone had spray painted over older graffiti. There were bottle caps in one corner, a single work glove on the bench, and a shoelace tied around a nail. I sat, ate almonds, checked my phone, and listened to water dripping from cedar boughs. The first odd thing was how many hikers started passing the opening, not on the trail, just beyond it between the trees. At first I only noticed movement. Then I realized they were all walking at the same pace in single file, about 10 yards apart. One with a blue jacket, one with a red beanie, one with a pale umbrella though it wasn't raining. Each appeared between the same two trunks, crossed the same gap, and vanished behind the same cedar. I assumed there was a parallel trail I'd forgotten about. That was the rational explanation, and I clung to it hard enough to feel it in my teeth. Then the blue jacket hiker passed the gap again. Same pace, same posture, same arm swing. After him came the red beanie, then the pale umbrella. Again. I stood up, suddenly cold through the hoodie. The line kept going. Different people, but not quite different enough. A woman with a ponytail, an older man with poles, a kid with a bright pack, always the same spacing, always the same crossing between the trunks. None of them made any sound. I stepped out of the shelter to get a better angle. There was no parallel trail, only brush and trees dropping into a shallow ravine. That was when all of them stopped at once, not gradually, not one by one. Every figure froze mid-step behind whatever tree or shrub had partly covered them. I could only see pieces now, an elbow, a shoulder, the curve of a hat, a hand around bark. I told myself there were real people out there messing with me. Flash mob hikers, some bizarre local prank. My brain was working overtime because the alternative felt too big. Then one arm reached from one tree to the next. It didn't leave its body behind. The arm just kept extending through the gap, too long, too jointed, sleeve and all, until the hand gripped the cedar 10 feet away. Then the rest of that hiker slid after it in a smooth pull like a bead on a wire. That was the iconic moment, not a face. That arm threading through the trees where no arm should have fit. I backed into the shelter. The line began moving again, but now not in file. They spread, not fast, no hurry. One figure leaned around the missing wall, and I saw there was no face under the hood, only darkness packed with the suggestion of other faces deeper in. Another stepped onto the old platform and lifted a trekking pole that bent in the middle like a limb. I ran for the service road instead of the main trail because it was wider, and I was suddenly convinced open space mattered. Branches slapped my ears. My phone light bounced uselessly. Behind me I heard hiking sounds, familiar ones, pole tips, quick breaths, shoe tread on gravel, except there were too many of them and they stayed perfectly coordinated. Once my own voice called, "Wrong way," from ahead. I didn't listen. I cut downslope where I knew or thought I knew the road would be. I hit it hard enough to slide on wet gravel and